So, Big Red and Big Blue haven't done a particularly great job recently. But if we could get some great independent candidates elected, that would change, right? Well, I spoke to someone who tried. Here's how it went. Dominique, thank you for inviting me into your home.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be able to do this interview with you. Firstly, I wanted to talk about your experience as an independent candidate. I've spoken to lots of people over the last few years who are really interested in some form of political action, oftentimes talking about either running for a party or running as an independent. But I thought it would be really great to get someone like yourself who's run 2 campaigns as an independent and talk to you a bit about your experiences for anyone who's thinking of doing something similar so they can learn from you, if that's all right.
Sure.
So, first of all, you ran 2 campaigns in 2022, one state and one federal, both as an independent candidate. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you chose to be independent?
Well, none of the parties were representing what I thought needed to be represented. They were very much running a same old campaign.
What do you mean, sorry?
I didn't think they were really addressing any of the issues that needed to be addressed. They weren't bringing things to light that needed to be brought to light. And there's a lot of things that are happening that people just aren't aware of. They're going about their day-to-day lives, worrying about their kids, obviously, their incomes, their mortgages. And it's not really in the forefront of their minds about some of these other things that are going on in the broader community and in the world at large. And the politicians aren't bringing it out either. They're just running their same old campaign, more jobs, more growth, bigger economy, low-cost housing, green economy. But they weren't not really talking about some of the issues that are in the background, things that are happening, like what's being taught in the schools from a very early age these days, and what sort of impact that's having on very young minds. And yeah, I just felt that there was a need for something different, a change, and none of the parties were covering that sort of stuff. And there's the whole issue about whether parties are actually legal or not in terms of the constitutional, Australia's constitution.
Oh, okay. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
The constitution is set up so that people are represented by their local, someone who knows the community, someone who's got their best interests at heart. When the parties come into the picture, they select a candidate not based on where they live or their knowledge of the local area, but perhaps on their charisma, on their ability to schmooze the public. It's not on local issues. Then they don't necessarily know the community that they're running in very well.
And they don't even have to live in the electorate.
Correct, which was a surprise to me.
And myself.
Yes. So when you run a campaign, you find that there's a lot of people running in your district who don't necessarily live in your district, who don't necessarily work in the district, who don't really know a lot about the district, but they're running there because perhaps they don't have a candidate from that party in that area. So there's no real connection. And the idea of someone running for Parliament, whether it be state or federal, is that you're representing the people in your community. If you're not living or working, at least working in the community, how can you know the vibe in the community, what the community is thinking, what the people in the street are talking about, what the issues are? You can't really. Yeah.
So for anyone who knows of you, because obviously having run a couple of campaigns, there should be at least some people. That's just a minor party joke. I'm sorry about that. They'll have been either under the impression that you ran with a party called Australia One, or that you were in some way in league with them. But you ran as an independent officially as far as the election goes. So what was behind your decision to run? Well, in fact, how did that whole situation actually work out?
Okay. So I was a supporter group leader for Australia One for a number of years. I really liked their policies. They really resonate in many aspects. They're concerned with the kids, what's happening with the kids. They're very pro-life. They're very concerned about moral values. Some of the big things about sovereignty and being able to defend ourselves. So some really big key issues that aren't really being discussed or in any detail. Also about Australia being able to be independent within ourselves, so not having all the manufacturing offshore, but having because we're such a mineral rich country, we've got so much going for us, but the way the parties have been moving the country is that a lot of our manufacturing base has gone offshore because it's so much cheaper, and it's been encouraged through changes in law and the like, and it's eroding Australia's ability to be self-reliant. And if there is something major happening in the world and supply lines are cut, where does that leave us? Because we are so far away from any other country, we're really at the mercy of many countries to import many of our goods. China in particular is a big one.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are seeing that now in terms of in trades areas or places that are manufacturing, needing raw materials. There's a shortage and a delay.
Yeah, so it evolved that Australia One decided to see if there are people interested in running in the federal election at that stage. And not many people were putting their hands up. So I thought, well, I'm really concerned, I'm really passionate, and I really want to see some change happening. So I put my hand up, and they interviewed me as to see whether my thoughts aligned with the policies that they were running with, and we were very well aligned. So they chose to back me. However, I wasn't running it as an Australian One candidate because they're not yet a registered party. So, and they don't believe in registered parties because of the, as we've already discussed, how the parties actually operate. So I ran as an independent candidate, and it was up to me to do everything. They did provide some financial backing, but it was for the federal campaign, they only matched to a certain amount what money I was able to raise as an independent campaign. And the whole campaign was mine from where to go. So that's pretty much how it ran.
Did they support you at all with volunteers or connections, material?
Well, certainly some of the supporters helped with my campaign as volunteers, and some of the other supporter groups that may not have had a candidate running also supported me. But there are a lot of local people that once they found out what I stood for, and this is my greyhound Larry. He says hi. We're very happy to assist, and it's running as an independent is tough. It's really tough. If you don't have a big party machine behind you, backing you, it is really, really tough. not only the workload, although it's very intense and concentrated, but just because no one had any experience, no one knew what to expect. It was really a very, very grassroots campaign.
A proper grassroots campaign as compared to the teals.
Yes.
Which, for people who aren't familiar, I believe they were backed by some multi-millionaires, and they had a lot of money to splash coming from very few sources for people who considered themselves independent.
Yes, whereas the Australia One vetted candidates were very much independent. We ran our own campaigns. It was up to us how we focused them, whether we, as long as it was based on the Australia One principles, it was our campaign to run as we wanted.
The question comes to mind, and I don't mean to be too personal, but did you spend any personal funds on your campaign?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
People think you need hundreds of thousands to run as a candidate, and it's just not true. For the federal campaign, I raised, I think it was about 23,000, and that was the total budget for the whole campaign.
That's considerable.
It's considerable, but the parties run on a heck of a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have the budget to do the kind of advertising that they could, but I did what I could with what I had.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of people in position to make good donations, but it was only in the region of sort of 1,000 or 2,000 maybe. It certainly wasn't like any of these major corporates and lobby groups. It was small feed.
And there's some interesting laws around donations. I know in the state.
In the state campaign, yes, definitely.
Is there in the federal as well?
That's testing my memory. Not to the same extent as state, no. For the state, you needed to make sure that any donor was Australian citizen, so that they could actually vote. And if they contributed more than a certain amount, they had to declare the amount they were donating through a website.
Yeah.
So it was all above board. But I think, and this is my opinion, that the parties probably got around that through running fundraising dinners and the like. So, yeah.
There was I think it's a 4-year cap of around $4,000, wasn't it, per person?
That sounds about right for the state.
Yeah.
The cap is only about declaration, so you can actually donate more. This is testing my memory. I believe you can donate more, but you do have to declare the amount. Yeah, and there are limits for within that 4-year period, as you say. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you go about running? We'll start with the federal campaign in
May.
The election was in May.
Mm.
How did you go about running the campaign? You've got no experience running a campaign. You've got limited support from the party that doesn't properly endorse you as far as the Australian Electoral Commission is concerned with endorsement. What kind of activities do you invest in? What did you learn from the process? What was more fruitful than others?
Wow, it was a full-on time, that's for sure. Because I am actually a federal public servant, for one thing, I had to resign my job in order to be able to run as a candidate. So that was a bit scary.
Did they take you back?
The way that they do it is that you resign to run for an election so that if you're unsuccessful, they can re-engage you. However, in the meantime, if you have a birthday like I did in May, it can significantly impact superannuation and the like. And yeah, during that time, I was not receiving a salary, obviously. So, yeah, it got a bit tight towards the end.
Yep, I can imagine.
Before getting re-engaged. But, so basically what I did was read the manuals put out by the Electoral Commission. And I was fortunate that I had for my national campaign, I had someone who was a project manager who put their hand up to support me as a campaign manager. And that was amazing, and they did an amazing job. But that was pretty much it. It was myself and the campaign manager doing everything. So it was coordinating volunteers, getting leaflets designed, finding quotes to get them printed, finding suppliers to do T-shirts, finding people to do call flutes. It was everything.
Yeah.
It was a 24/7 job for couple of months, and then it was all the associated wind-up work in reporting to the Electoral Commission, and just thanking volunteers, having a thank you party. I guess I probably underestimated the work, but it was intense, really intense. Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, how much of the vote did you get?
Not enough to be able to get any money back.
Get money back?
Yeah, so I think it's 3%, higher than 3% you need. You actually get money for every vote that you get over, as long as you get at least 3%. So you get paid for the people voting for you. That was a surprise too.
That would include the big candidates, right?
Yep.
Do you recall if that comes out of taxpayer funds?
I believe it does.
So these people are getting paid out of our dollars to run their campaigns, essentially.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So less than 3 to 4% then.
Yeah, it was. There were 13, if I remember correctly, 13 candidates in Chisholm I was against. So obviously that was
wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot. That included the big parties, of course, and many minors, many of whom you didn't even see during the campaign at all. You didn't. There were many that I never met. You just didn't see them. There was no posters, no flyers. They were kind of candidates in name only, running under a party name.
Paper candidates.
Yeah. So I didn't expect that either. But I think the idea of running people like that is to split the vote. So what counts is where the preferences go. If you vote for that particular person for that party, you're essentially, then their votes get funneled into the majors.
Yeah.
And many of the minor independents, disappointingly, funneled their votes that way because of whatever deals that they did, instead of supporting the other minors, true independents or true minor parties, for them to get up and have a real chance.
Yeah. Strange that there was a lot of minor parties who would preference Labour or Liberal or even Greens over other minor parties, where you would have thought the whole point of being a minor party was to try and swing the power away from the big parties.
It was very, very disappointing because there was a big campaign about put the major parties last, because of what the major parties were pushing, and also because the minor parties, many of them being really aware and awake about the the world events and what the major parties were trying to do. So it was actually very, very, very disappointing in that respect that I was the only independent or minor who did put the majors truly last in preferencing.
Did you have any altercations with the other candidates? Or was it all pretty civil?
No, it was pretty civil, but there was some dirty stuff happening in the background, which I have reason to believe was potentially through the parties. Things like posters being removed, call flutes being removed, posters being torn down. And in the state campaign, we actually caught, one of my volunteers caught two people in the act of removing call flutes, which is actually a crime, as in interference with political liberty. In both state and federal elections, it's a crime. And the person was very brave, a woman. She confronted the two young men and had a discussion with them. They ended up, they didn't return my call flutes. They ended up driving off, and she had the nous to take a photo of the number plate, and it was at a major intersection, and we reported to police the following day. Unfortunately, police didn't look for video footage from the traffic cameras because it was a major intersection. I think there would have been footage.
Yeah.
So they didn't have that as backup evidence. But we did have the lady's testimony, and one of the two people ended up being located and getting charged. They were originally charged for theft, which is a fairly minor offence. I pursued it through the Victorian Electoral Commission, and they ended up, the police added the charge, I think, through the Electoral Commission, pushing them of the interference with the political liberty, which carries a hefty charge, which I think was something in the order of at least $10,000 fine and or 5 years imprisonment at if it's pursued to its fullest extent.
Oh, that's pretty serious.
It is, but although they have the law, it's not something they like to charge people with, as evidenced in my case. I really had to push to get that charge added.
Right. I would have thought interfering with call flutes and defacing signs and all of that was, I won't say, I was going to say commonplace. Obviously not everywhere all the time on everyone's stuff, but at least to some degree in pretty much every election. But I've never heard of anyone being pulled up on any charges over it.
No, it's actually very hard to charge someone because unless you catch them in the act, you can't prove it. So it was only by providence, if you like, that this lady happened to be passing through the intersection, saw these people removing call flutes, and actually had the guts to pursue it. As it turned out, one of the people charged, and only one of them was charged, worked in an electoral office of a sitting member, had been an intern with someone involved with politics.
Yeah.
And was also studying law. So there was no ignorance that could be pled in that case, I believe, given their background. And as the case turned out, the police, as I said, really didn't want to pursue the interference with political liberty. And if you look up the cases, it's really hasn't really been tried so far in the courts to any degree. So that case, that charge ended up being dropped. and the person pled guilty to theft, and I haven't yet been able to find out whether there was any penalty applied. So really, although the charge is there and the mechanism is there to charge someone if you're in the fortunate position to find and catch them, the courts won't pursue it, the police won't pursue it. So it's really an empty charge, if you like. And most people aren't aware of the charge even being existing.
Yeah, it's a real shame.
Yeah, it's very disappointing.
After going through one campaign, you then went through it again for the state campaign. Did you have to leave your job a second time, or had they not brought you back by that point? Did you just tick straight over into the next campaign?
No, I had gone back to work. I think I went back in August, and the next campaign was November. This time, because it was a state campaign and I wasn't a state public servant, I was able to keep my job, but I had to be on leave. So I took annual leave or long service leave for that period. So at least I was in the better position of having to have an income to support me while I campaigned.
Yeah, much better. And what did you do differently in the state campaign? If there was anything, were there any learnings from the federal campaign which you took into the state? Did they work out better or worse?
Oh, some things that worked in the federal campaign didn't work in the state campaign. Some things I was able to do in the federal campaign I wasn't able to do in the state campaign because I didn't have quite as much money raised. I think there's a bit of election fatigue, not unsurprisingly. And many of the people that supported me in the federal probably, they may have been in a different area and supporting a different candidate. So I ran for Oakley District in the state campaign, which was, a slightly different demographic to Chisholm. So there is some overlap, but some different area. In the federal campaign, one of the things that I was able to do, just because I had a little bit of funding that we hadn't allocated at the time, was have one of those big trucks with a digital billboard, if you like, driving round.
Yeah. And what did you put on it?
Me.
Just you, okay. Well, I was just wondering if it would be like a hit piece or something.
No, it's just basically promoting myself as an independent candidate and some of the key points. But yeah, for the state campaign, I only raised about half the amount that I had for federal. Obviously, different pool, different volunteers.
Yep.
So, yeah, slightly different targeting. One of the things that worked well for the federal campaign was I had easels, which were cheap to put up the call flutes for the various polling booths on the day. In the state campaign, that didn't work so well because it was windy, a different climate, and just weird things like that. And also the rules are slightly different for both. So it's a bit of test and adjust. So what you could do for the federal campaign, you couldn't necessarily do for the state campaign. And a lot of the timeframes for the state were a lot tighter than for federal.
Okay.
So the amount of time that you had, because for the state you had to get, they were more stringent about your flyers and approvals, and you had to get certain approvals before you get your flyers printed. And that's another story. There was some funny business happening around printers and contracts for flyers. So there were certain printers you couldn't use because the party had tied them up with contracts.
Right.
and they wouldn't print any other electoral material.
Yep. Okay.
So again, it makes it harder for the little person trying to get a good deal, and with the tight turnarounds, it was really tough and really stressful. And for the state, they wouldn't actually tell you necessarily what was wrong with the flyer.
Okay.
They just give you a general indication, and you had to try and work it out from the examples they'd provided. And my flyer got rejected a couple of times, and I think the last time it shouldn't have been rejected, and I was running on a really tight time frame to get these flyers printed and get them all delivered everywhere over the district.
Yeah.
And it was a little stressful, shall we say.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And coordinating, you had to get a decent photo shot. Luckily, I had that from the federal, but again, you had to redo all the flyers. Obviously, retarget your message. So again, in many ways, it's starting from scratch in aiming for a different level. Yeah.
Did you spend much time on the ground talking to either shoppers or passers-by wherever you were?
Unfortunately, that was a bit of a luxury because it was such a tight time frame. For the state, I had a bit more flexibility. I did go out to some of the shopping areas. Again, the shopping centres have their own rules about what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
They wouldn't necessarily allow you in the shopping centre wearing any campaign material, handing out any flyers. So the best you could do was try and target people going into the shopping areas. But yeah, it was very hard. People didn't necessarily want to talk to you if you weren't a major party, if they didn't really know what you stood for. Yeah, it was hard. But one of the things I did for the state campaign was to hold a town hall, if you like, but without local papers and etc. It's really hard to get the word out. Really hard.
Yeah. So from the people that you did talk to, what was this is a little bit of a loaded question, but what was the impression you got of the average voter?
Many people were going to vote the way they'd always voted. They weren't necessarily aware of some of the bigger picture stuff happening. As I said, people get on with their daily lives. Politics, they probably take notice in as far as what's on the news, what's shown in the major media. And there's no way, as an independent, you can get that sort of platform.
So how did you go in the state election compared to the federal? Did you increase your vote? Did you decrease? Was it fairly similar?
It was pretty similar. In the federal, I think I came, from memory, 5th out of the 13.
That's pretty good.
In the state, I came 4th. So on top of all the other minors and independents, but behind the Labor, Liberal, Greens candidates.
Are you happy with the results?
I was very disappointed. I thought people would be more aware of what was going on. I thought it was time for... Yeah, I thought there would be more dissatisfaction with the way things were going, but I think it's more people coming home, seeing to their families, turning the TV on, listening to the media messaging, and they're not digging about what the real truth is. They're not looking at what acts are coming through Parliament, what bills are coming through, what's changing in what's being taught in schools.
Yeah.
They're just so busy with their own little family and what's going in their small circle of influence. They're not really looking broader or wider, unfortunately. And I don't know what will be the catalyst to change that. But I live in hope because something's got to give. We can't keep heading the direction we're heading.
Yeah.
It's unsustainable.
Yeah, it is. I believe we have another election coming up next year. Can you believe it? Seems like I never paid too much attention to elections.
We've got council at the end of the year.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you consider that government. But yeah, I never realized just how frequently we have elections. But do you plan on running again? Or is it undecided?
That's a loaded question.
I didn't intend it to be a loaded question.
It's undecided at the moment. Running the 2 campaigns within 6 months, you don't realise it at the time because you're just running on adrenaline, I think. And you're just focusing on what do I need to do next, what's next. You've not got any time to sit and think and realise what impact it's having on you, all that stress in a concentrated period of time. And you have to consider what is the toll on you at the end of the day. Although you want to get the word out and you want to keep pushing and you want things to change, unless there is a catalyst and people start looking more broadly, more deeply, the parties have really got it tied up. So you really need a major change, major catalyst for a real difference to happen.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, at the moment, I'm on the fence.
It struck me as funny talking so much during campaigns about democracy when the way our election system currently works is if you say we, vote in a majority of people from a single party who then can essentially do whatever they want for the term of their seat.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if you're voting for a person, you're still voting for a party behind them. And that person, whatever good intentions they may or may not have, will be quickly brought into line by the party in large. There's not a lot of scope to cross the floor. It's certainly very frowned upon, so voting against what the party thinks. And there's very few votes where they'll actually allow people to vote by their conscience rather than along party lines. So people need to understand when they're voting for someone to represent them, they're actually voting for the party, and they need to understand what the party is standing for because it's not the person. They're not truly being represented by someone in their community. They're being represented by this big corporate body, and you need to look at and understand what their agenda is. It is not really supporting I don't believe it's not really supporting the community as a whole. It's pushing bigger agendas.
Yeah. Do you think there actually has been any value to your campaigns, to the 2 of them, outside of the fact that you didn't get elected?
I think it does create awareness if people take the time to read the flyer, look at the website, that sort of thing. But
is it worth using, in your opinion, the election process as a stage and a platform to raise awareness over political issues?
It definitely is, but it is so difficult as an independent to get your voice out there.
And probably difficult as a non-independent to get your voice out there, but for a completely different reason.
Yeah. So as a representative of a major party, your voice is swallowed up by the party.
Yeah.
And as a representative of a minor party, you can't get your voice out there. The party system is against you, and the voting system is against you. The whole preferential voting is stacked for the majors. The way the preferences fall is vital. So the way that the minors assign their preferences is vital in who actually ends up getting into a particular seat in a particular electorate or district.
Yeah.
It should be one vote for one candidate, not preferential. That would be far more representative of the voice of the people. It would also avoid some of these paper-only candidates standing, I think, and diluting the vote by having so many candidates that you never see. But they put all these candidates to dilute the vote and to redirect the preferences to the majors. That's one of the tactics. And that would be stopped if it was one vote for one person.
Yeah. In the interest of being honest, in the federal campaign, I was one of those paper candidates.
Whoops.
Whoops. And what I found out was being a paper candidate didn't really help the party. It didn't help the people. In the case of getting the money back for your election results, you're really just creating 5 candidates who don't get enough to get their money back instead of 1 or 2 candidates who do.
Yeah.
And it was only after the campaign that I found out that the bigwigs for the Liberal Democrats were also making deals with other parties for preferences.
Yeah, backroom
using
deals.
the services of unsavory people who like to circumvent the electoral process. And for anyone out there who doesn't know what I'm talking about, look up the Preference Whisperer. And honestly, the whole experience just felt fraudulent, felt unprofessional. It felt like it discredited everyone involved. And I don't think it really made any difference in terms of raising awareness about anything. But it's doubly interesting for someone like myself to hear from your experience what those paper candidates did actually do to your campaign when you were someone who was actually running a proper campaign and trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
And would have actually been able to make a positive impact if you'd had a bit less split attention.
Correct. And unfortunately, there are several of the minor parties that really only put someone up purely to funnel preferences to the majors. And it's often very telling in the way they put their preferences, putting the majors very high up in that preferencing system.
Yeah.
It was also very telling that in many of the preferences I was very low down. So they definitely didn't want a true independent to get up. I mean, there's, you know that politics is a dirty business, but you don't realise just how dirty it is until you run as a candidate or get involved at a basic level. Just things like the number of polling booths they have on the day in an area. It's very, very difficult for an independent to cover all those polling booths. Also, the number of pre-polling booths and the length of time that they're open for makes it also very difficult to get volunteers to man them fully. So unless you're part of the big party machine, it is very hard to become known, to get the word out there, and really to have, because we've got other mechanisms like absentee voting if you're not in the area that you need to be on the day, postal voting, which although it's not great, it's another option. So many people are using the pre-polling just to get it out the way rather than out of a genuine need because they can't attend on the day. And again, it's just another factor that stacks it against the little guys.
Guilty in the past, not recently. So before we wrap up, for anyone considering running their own campaign as an independent, would you have any advice, any words of wisdom?
Be prepared to live it for 24/7 for the length of the campaign. Have good, sound policies, things that you can talk to, that you're passionate about, that you believe in. But really be prepared for a hard slog and be prepared for the disappointment, unless there's a big shift in the interim.
That's unfortunately very similar to my impressions after helping out with 2 campaigns. But Dominique, thank you very much for having me over, and your 2 dogs. What are their names?
There's Larry on the couch here, and that's Henky saying hello to Tim over there.
Oh, well, hello, Henky. Thank you very much for your time and for your experience and for sharing that with us. I wish you all the best in the future, and I hope we haven't seen the last of you.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Dom.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you've got any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments. And remember to look out for Dominique next time election season rolls around. Catch you next time.